Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe. Hope you're all doing well on this Wednesday afternoon or morning or evening, wherever it is in the world that you are. We've made it halfway through the week. I still can't speak English today. But a big hello, good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone joining me here live on Behance. If you are tuning in, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Sam and Stony and Frank and Jennifer and Robert and Clarissa, Carol, Susan, Mercurial, Nourish, General Kenobi. Great to see all of you. Hope you're well. Hope you're excited for another challenge. We're going to dive into things pretty quickly today because we do have a fun and pretty in-depth challenge. So I'm going to go ahead and hop over to my screen. And if you haven't participated yet or you want, is it Wednesday? It is Wednesday. You scared me, Mercurial. I think it's Wednesday at least. I don't know. I don't know days anymore. Could be Thursday for some of you. Lucky. All right. So behance.net/challenge/Photoshop. Get all the information about these challenges right here every single day, Monday to Friday, except that first Monday you'll receive a new challenge. You can join us in our community chat right on Discord. We have about 2,400, almost 2,500 people online right now. You get information about the challenges, talk about Photoshop, share tips and tricks, talk with the community about whatever it is that you want, and more importantly, you can share your work in the challenge channels. So we have a bunch of people already sharing work here. Leslie has created this great photo composition with all these photos. That's amazing. Great job, Leslie. And Frank has animated his amazing caricature. I think that's great. Look at that. That's amazing. And then I saw another amazing photo composition right up here, Ninja Turtles, with all these different photos. I think this is great. Amazing work, everyone. So definitely hop in there, check out some work, submit your work. We have some wonderful mentors and moderators on the side here. It's a great community. Dorina says, I've been thinking all day that it's Tuesday. Well, good news, Dorina. It's Wednesday. One step closer to the weekend and also one day closer to Adobe Max, which is coming up next month in October. Can you believe we're in September? max.adobe.com, register. It's completely free, online. It's going to be a good time. So, last week we started with Select and Mask, moved on to Glow Effects, photo editing, stylized text using layer styles, which we're going to be using a lot of today. Liquify, photo composition yesterday, that was a lot of fun. And then today, we're going to be tackling icons and badges. And these are great if you're designing games or, fun experiences, mobile apps. If you're a Twitch streamer and you want to design emotes, you can do that using these techniques. So I'm going to go ahead and hop over to Photoshop. If you haven't grabbed that starter file yet, definitely hit that button right over there. And we're going to get going. So here is the template for today. And again, today's challenge is to design icons or badges for a mobile game using shapes. And of course, you can design this for whatever you want. If you don't want to do a mobile game, you want to do a, Twitch emotes or who knows what. All sorts of things use badges, right? And we're going to be using shapes and layer styles, all sorts of fun stuff. It's going to be a good time. And over to the right, we have some inspiration, some very cute badges over here to the left, which was designed by Harper Graphics. And then these ones over here, these are a little bit more, I don't want to say polished because the ones on the left are also polished, but they're different. Also good, but different, right? And these were designed by this user over here. I'm gonna butcher the name, so I'm not even gonna bother. All right, so what we're gonna do is right down here, we're gonna start our designing. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to block in the shapes that we're going to be using for this badge. And we're going to be designing something very similar to these ones at the top with a little bit of a twist possibly. So I'm going to go ahead over on the tools on the left. I'm going to hop into the shapes and let's go ahead and select the Polygon tool. If you want to get a little bit creative, you can also go into the custom shape tool. And then at the top here in the shape picker, there's all sorts of custom shapes that you can use for your badges. You can also create your own custom shapes if you want to. That's a whole other tutorial, but you can definitely do that. But for now, I'm going to grab the good old Polygon tool. Whoops. There we go, I lost the screen. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and grab the Polygon tool. I'm gonna draw one out. I'm gonna hold down my Shift key to constrain it to a perfect shape. Pop it somewhere in the middle. And then I do have in my properties, I do have some of the elements selected already. So I have, 6 sides for this shape, which is exactly what I want. But of course you can go up or down. You can do, 5 sides, you can do 7 sides, completely up to you. And for the fill on this shape, I'm gonna turn off the stroke for now. For the fill, we're gonna go for, sort of a goldish color. Now you can do that either in the properties right over here, or you can double click on the actual vector thumbnail inside of the layers panel. That'll bring up your color picker and you'll be able to choose your color. Again, we're just blocking things in right now, so I'm gonna go ahead and accept that. And if you also wanted to, you can also round out the corners of your shape as well. But I'm gonna keep it nice and straight for these ones. And if you are working with like a 5-sided shape, you can also create a star right from the properties over here. Now I may want this one to be rotated a little bit. So I'm gonna show my transform controls or Command and Control T. And I'm gonna rotate by hovering outside and just rotating a little bit, something like that. And I'm holding down my Shift key to rotate at 15 degrees at a time. Now, on the inside of this, we may want an additional shape that will act as the inner portion of this badge. And we're gonna be using the exact same shape here. So I'm gonna duplicate this, Command or Control J, or you can drag your shape in your layers panel down to the new icon, and that'll duplicate it as well. And then I'm gonna transform it one more time inwards, just so we have a bit of a border on the outside. But because these two shapes are exactly the same color, I'm gonna double click and just change this to something a little bit darker, a little bit lighter. Doesn't matter, just like that. And then finally on the inside of this, we may want a star. So to make that process a little bit easier, I'm gonna once again duplicate Command and Control J, shrink it on down. This one I'll change the color to more of like a grayish silver color. And then back in the properties, I can maybe drop the sides to 5. And I'm going to drop the star radius a little bit, or drop the percentage. And then maybe I'll round to the corners a little bit. Just a touch. I don't want to go too crazy with this, but just a little bit. And then because this one was rotated previously, I'm going to transform it and just kind of pull it back. And if I need to, I can always pull it in on the sides as well. So just like that, we have all of our shapes in place. But of course, this is looking pretty flat. But of course, if that's the style you're going for, we're done, right? But we want to get fancy with this, of course. So what we're going to do is we're going to start on the backmost shape, and we're going to go crazy with some layer styles. So I'm going to, on this shape in the back, right in my layers panel, I'm going to make sure to double click on an empty area over here, just like that. That's going to bring up my layer styles. And we're going to go ahead and apply a bevel and emboss. And we explored this during the challenge where we created our stylized text. And let me actually reset to default so we can start at the beginning. And the default settings, not great, right? So we want to go a little bit crazy. We're going to stick with an inner bevel so that the actual bevel is on the inside. Things like emboss and pillow emboss will also kind of give you that effect if you use the right settings. I'm going to maybe switch this over to chisel hard, so it's a little bit sharper, and then increase the depth somewhere around, I don't know, let's say 400, somewhere in that range there, so it's nice and deep. And then the size, we might actually want to bring this down a little bit, and then the size we're going to increase as well. And that would basically take this and pull it inwards, right? As you can see, as I'm increasing this, it's pulling that inwards a little bit. And it's already giving us a pretty nice 3D looking shape, but it's not there yet, right? So we're going to experiment with some other things. We're going to turn off global light. And like I explained previously, if you have global light on, it's going to match the lighting across all of your layer styles. And in some cases, you may absolutely want that, but in some cases, you may want a little bit more control over that lighting. So I'm going to, bump this up a little bit, maybe 110. And then I'll stick with about 30. And you're noticing as I did that, the lighting is actually changing, right? So definitely experiment with these sorts of values. And then we may want to also experiment with our gloss contour. And this is really where you're going to get some different style effects. And as I kind of, cycle through these using the arrow keys on my keyboard, you're noticing, we have some pretty interesting effects going on, right? So I'll stick with this one. And then highlight mode, something like screen or overlay or soft light usually works pretty well. Overlay will give you some fun, lighting effects. And then shadow mode, multiply is going to give you a pretty harsh effect. So I usually like to do soft light or overlay on these as well, and then bump this up a touch. And as you can see from, soft light and then multiply, there is a bit of a difference, right? It's not as harsh. It's looking okay, right? But if we also add a contour on the inside of this, maybe the same, shape, something like that. Look at that. Now we're getting somewhere. I can turn on anti-aliased, and all of a sudden we have a really interesting shape just by turning that contour. There's off and there's on. So it's a completely different shape now. And as you're going through this, you can definitely experiment with, more of the sizing and that sort of thing. But that looks pretty good right about there. Now you are noticing a little bit of, texture almost, right? And that's because we have chisel hard selected. You can definitely experiment with smooth and chisel hard, but smooth is going to give you this, very smooth shapes, which might not want, right? You can also soften it a little bit as well to help with that. And then the lighting effects will definitely come into play just like that. All right, so this shape looks pretty good. Could use some tweaks, but we're gonna move on to the next shape, which is gonna have probably more layer styles than this one. So I'm gonna actually hide the star for now. So this second shape that we created, the one on the inside, once again, we're going to double click on this. So Marcia is asking, is there an advantage to use Photoshop rather than Illustrator for the icon? So personally, I would typically use Illustrator for icons and things like that because it's more of a vector application. You can absolutely use, you can absolutely create vector shapes and vector icons in Photoshop, but things like these layer styles, they typically don't translate well when you're exporting SVGs or vector images, right? So Illustrator is probably your best bet. But if you don't have Illustrator or you don't know Illustrator very well, then this works as well. But definitely keep in mind that things like layer styles, if you do want to keep it vector when you're exporting, may not translate perfectly. So for this one, we're actually going to start by applying a gradient overlay just to give it a little bit more of a shine. And, angle's not bad, but I'm going to actually switch it over to radial. And I do have a gradient already applied here, which essentially in the middle, because I have a radial gradient, the middle's a lighter color and the outer color is a little bit darker, and you can just double click on these nodes and make some changes as needed. And if you need to, you can also adjust the angle. It's not going to come into play too much with radial gradients. It'll move a little bit, but you can definitely do that. And then going back to bevel and emboss, this is where things will get, again, like the previous shape, a little bit exciting and interesting. So we're going to stick with the inner bevel, but maybe we'll switch over back to smooth for this particular shape. And then we're going to start playing around with these settings again. So maybe I'll drop the depth a little bit because this shape is on the inside. So, closer to maybe 200 looks pretty good. And then we might want to reverse the direction. So previously we had down, maybe we'll go up in this case, and then it'll drop the size. We don't want it too drastic like the shape on the outside. And then again, like the other shape, we can experiment with things like the altitude and the angle, just to get that lighting looking a little bit different. And then let's play around with a few different gloss contours to see what looks pretty good. That looks kind of interesting. I've always been a fan of these two settings right here. They're not going to work in all situations, but ring and double ring, they give you some really nice lighting effects. Especially if you're going for like a gold or silver or bronze type look, it works quite well. I'll keep these settings the same, but we're going to hop into contour again, and let's actually switch it over to something like the cone, right? And that'll give us another interesting bevel on this particular shape. And we can definitely go back and make changes to this. But if we turn off preview and then turn it back on, you're definitely seeing that we have some additional depth going on. And we have some ridges, and we have some contours, and things are looking pretty nice, right? And then in terms of the inner shadow, to help add a little bit of more depth to this, we may actually want 2 inner shadows. We may want one on the inside, kind of going around the entire inside, so it looks like there's a little bit of a, kind of almost like a rounded aspect to this, and something like overlay or soft light could definitely work. And I can increase the choke as well to bring it in a touch. Something like that. And then I may want one more inner shadow, so I can hit this plus button right over here to the right. And what I want for this one is I want essentially kind of a shadow at the top, so that almost, if the lighting is coming from the top up here and it's hitting this edge, which is raised up a little bit, it'll leave a little bit of a shadow up here. So instead of just using size and choke, I might want to actually drop the choke but increase the size, or the distance, something like this, and then drop the size so we have a much harsher shadow. And then I think overlay is, it's definitely saturating the color a little bit. It's bumping up that saturation. So I might want to drop this or change this to soft light, just so it's not too saturated. Something like that, just to give it a little bit of a shadow up at the top. Again, it just adds a little bit more depth to our particular design. And then finally, we explored this in the, what was it called? The stylized text challenge, using Satin to add some highlights to our shape. Now this is obviously a little bit too much, right? So I'm gonna switch this over to soft light so it's a little bit more subtle. We're gonna keep the color at white. I might drop the opacity a little bit. And then for the distance, I'm gonna crank the distance all the way up and then experiment with the size a little bit. Maybe somewhere around 65 looks pretty good. And then just like we did before, contours definitely can change how things look. This one right here looks pretty good. Almost looks like it has highlights and reflections and things like that. And as Robert's saying, you can definitely create your own contour, edit your own, or that sort of thing. So you can, if you don't like any of these, you can definitely create your own. You can import contours from the community and so on and so forth. So that one looks pretty good. I'll probably stick with that one, but let's see so this one looks similar, but it's a little bit softer. And then you have your rings, which is interesting, but I think this one's kind of cool too. It has a little bit of a banding effect. So if that's what you're looking for, that could work. But I think this could be what we're going to end up going with. And it just gives a little bit of a shine and highlight and reflection to the inside of this badge. And then finally, we have our star in the center, which is looking very flat right now. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna apply some very similar layer styles. So I'm going to double click one more time, and we're gonna keep the color. We're not gonna apply any sort of gradient. You certainly can. Maybe we'll do that if we have a little bit more time, but I'm gonna apply another Bevel and Emboss. And this one, I'm actually going to switch it over to Emboss. And what's nice about Emboss, if I zoom in here, is that it kind of creates this outline around it that it almost looks like it's going into the shape behind it, which is fun. And of course, as you start playing with the layer styles, it's going to hopefully look a little bit cleaner. So we're going to keep it at probably smooth, and maybe we'll increase the depth a little bit. Direction up looks pretty good. Maybe we'll increase the size, and again, you're kind of seeing what's going on here. And I'll definitely note that as you're seeing here, as you start to apply these layer styles and you start to tweak the settings, things are not going to look very good at first. This is the type of style that you have to really spend some time playing around with to get the exact result that you're looking for, right? So I'll play around with the angles to mess up the lighting a little bit, and then the contours. Let's try the cone inverted. Overlay, soft light, we'll keep those for now. We will be adding a contour, of course. interesting, right? It adds a little bit of a fun contour around the side. And then I'm going to go back and just kind of experiment with the size and the depth, just so it doesn't look too crazy and too overdone. That's not bad either. It almost looks like it has, various levels of bumping up or whatever it might be called, right? So definitely, and this one kind of looks like it's going inwards. So definitely experiment with many of these settings. Experiment with the direction, up or down, right? And sometimes, even if you choose up, depending on the contour that you choose, it could look like it's going down. So you got to really figure out what works best. Experiment with the regular contours as well. I think in this case, the rings are a little bit too overdone, but something like this one, which, what was it called again? It was called Rounded Steps. It's an interesting effect, right? And then from here, you can also add the good old satin. So very similar, we can experiment with either overlay or soft light, bump up the opacity. Now I will note that because the shape is, a light gray, we're not really seeing much going on right now. So we might have to change the color of that shape, and you can do that either with a color overlay, a gradient overlay, for example. We can change this to maybe light up here and maybe dark on the edges. Although, that looked kind of interesting. It almost looks like it has, a little bit of a, reflection, color spill and things like that. Looks interesting. So I might keep it. Maybe I'll just drop it a little bit. It kind of blends in quite nicely, right? And then just experiment with this. Can't really, again, you can't really see it too much. It's there. Adds a little bit of highlight up there. And satin can be used for a variety of applications and variety of elements, but in general, you can definitely use it for adding highlights and things like that. But yeah, you can definitely use it for a lot of different things. All right, so we do have probably another few minutes left. And what we can also do is add a little bit of a ribbon down at the bottom, very similar to, up here. So very quickly in the last, 2 minutes or so, what we can do is we can grab our triangle tool from the tools, and I might want to drag one out like this, nice and large, but I'm going to rotate it so that the left side is straight up and down. And then maybe I'll change the, I'll worry about the fill afterwards, but I'm going to round out the corners ever so slightly, somewhere around, let's try 10. And then I want this to kind of go on both sides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate. I'm going to hold down Alt-Option, drag this over, and I want to flip this around. So under the Edit menu, we can go down to Transform, and then Flip Horizontal. And I'm going to make sure that these are about even, and I can, easily line it up with these lines right up here of the actual badge itself. I can use my arrow keys for more precise movement. And then because I want to edit the layer styles and the styling in general of both of these objects at the same time, what I can do is inside the layers panel, select both of them, holding down Shift and clicking on the other one, and then merge them together. So I can either right click and then, there's so many options here, merge shapes, or Command or Control E will do the same thing. And because these are both vector shapes, it remains vector. So you can still adjust the corner radius and all that fun stuff inside of the properties. And I can move this behind these layers here. And then I can double click and apply some layer style. So very quickly, I'm gonna add a gradient overlay. For this one, we're gonna do a simple linear gradient, maybe up and down. We might wanna do, a darker red at the top, maybe a lighter red at the bottom. Maybe we'll apply a little bit of an inner shadow on the inside, just so that there's a little bit of depth there. There we go. And then finally, what you can also do is add some, additional shapes on the inside of this. So if I grab my, let's say, rectangle tool, I'm gonna draw one out here. And then I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, duplicate one over here. I can select both of these shapes and duplicate them on this side. Now, as you're obviously noticing, they're kind of spilling outside of this particular banner, right? So if I go ahead in the Layers panel and select all of these newly created shapes, and like we did in, I believe, yesterday's challenge, we can apply a clipping mask. So I can hold down Alt or Option, hover in between, and click. And click. And what I forgot to do is group those shapes so that they all get clipped at once, right? Now, what you're noticing, this is important. Because I have a gradient overlay applied to this particular shape, those clipped objects are gone, right? So if you do have a gradient overlay, and if I don't have a gradient overlay, we're gonna be more or less fine, assuming that the color is different, right? There we go. Now, if you do have that gradient overlay, inside of the Layer Styles dialog box, right over here, you'll want to turn this off and turn this on. So that way you can still have your shapes being clipped, and then you can go ahead and apply, some blend modes and fun stuff like that. And just like that, in about 25 minutes or so, I rushed through it, but hopefully you can all go back and watch this again, watch it at slower speed. But we now have this really fun looking stylized badge that we created with shapes and layer style. So hope you all enjoyed that. Can't wait to see what you all produce in Photoshop. Definitely submit it on Behance or in Discord. I'll see you all tomorrow, and stick around in just a few minutes. We have video editing for YouTube with the Fung Brothers. That should be a lot of fun. Thanks again, everyone, and I'll see you all tomorrow.